Katie, what's wrong with your face? Katie raised her left hand and touched her cheek. It hurt, but she didn't realize anything was noticeable. When she checked it right after the slap, it was just slightly red. She figured it would go away after a while. Without answering her friend, she turned and walked towards the mirror in the ladies' room and was shocked by the black and purple bruise on her cheekbone. Her friend followed her. "What's happened? Alan did this? Did he hit you?" "Diana, don't be funny. You know my husband. He would never hit any woman, let alone me." "Then who did this to you?" "Nobody, just me," she lied. "This morning I was putting a heavy bowl in the cupboard when it slipped, fell, and hit me. That's all. I'm just surprised it left such a bad bruise." Katie could tell from the look on her face that Diana didn't believe her. "What? My college roommate had an abusive boyfriend for a while. She used to come in the same form. Don't try to fool me, someone hit you," Diana challenged. Katie stared at her silently for a moment, not knowing what to say. Her mind went into a frenzy, trying to decide whether to confess everything or try to bluff. "Well, that's my version, and I'm sticking to it," she joked, trying to lighten the mood a little. "Listen, no one offended me. It was an accident, just forget it." Diana couldn't help but get angry. They were supposed to be best friends. Friends trust each other. Then she remembered her old college roommate. She also did not immediately admit that she had been subjected to violence. Admitting that you are a victim of abuse is difficult for anyone, so she decided not to push. "Okay, I'll leave it at that for now, but if this happens again, I won't make any promises. I'm serious, Kat. This will not happen again." "I already took care," she replied. With these words, Diana left, and Katie tried to hide the bruise with makeup. Unfortunately, she didn't have what she needed, so she didn't do a very good job. For the rest of the day, she noticed people staring at her. After work, she prayed to get home before her husband. He was a photographer and owned the Hodges photography business on the north side of town. In the early days, when it first opened, he ran the entire establishment alone and rarely returned home before 8 or 9 in the evening. But once he got back on his feet, he was able to hire an assistant. He interviewed for 2 weeks before hiring Michelle. Michelle was personable, energetic, and very eager to learn. During the first year, she interacted with clients, signed them up for shoots, and even did shoots in some simpler cases. All this freed up some personal time for Al. Hell, sometimes, when things were going slowly, he'd even leave early and let Michelle close the door. From time to time, he beat his wife to the punch, arriving home a good hour or 2 earlier. Her heart nearly stopped when she opened the garage door and saw his SUV parked in its spot. "Damn!" she mentally cursed. Diana saw right through her lies. She hoped Al didn't have the same friend who was treated poorly in college. The plan was to yell that she needed to go to the bathroom before Al could see her, apply some foundation to the bruise, then walk down the stairs and give him the usual hug and kiss in greeting. Unfortunately for her, he was just walking up the stairs himself and was right at the door when she entered. She found herself in his arms, and his lips were on hers before she even realized it. Their lips were just about to touch when he stopped. "Honey, what the hell happened?" he asked, taking a closer look. She had learned her lesson from her encounter with Diana and had the best answer ready just in case she needed it. She spoke as nonchalantly as she could. "Yes, it happened in a restaurant during lunch. I had to go to the ladies' room. I did my job, but on the way out I felt that the strap on the heel of my shoe was twisted. I bent down to adjust it, and just then someone opened the door to enter. She hit me right in the face and almost knocked me down. The woman felt terrible, but I said that it was not her fault, but my fault, because I was so stupid." "Ooh, that must have hurt," he said, pecking her softly on the lips. "Here, sit down. I'll get some ice." She sat down on the couch and felt relieved that he seemed to swallow her story, hook and sinker. When he returned, he sat down next to her, wrapped his left arm around her shoulders, and gently pressed the ice pack against her bruise. She closed her eyes and smiled gratefully, involuntary sighing in relief. knowing that it was all over with Tony. This shouldn't have happened to begin with, and for weeks she was riddled with guilt. At that moment, she felt more relaxed than she had felt in a long time. Bruise or not, as soon as they were in bed, she was going to make love to her man like she hadn't done in ages. In fact, she became obsessed with the idea. After cleaning up and putting the dishes from dinner in the dishwasher, they both returned to the living room. Al settled into his reclining chair with a Mickey Spillane novel he was reading while Katie walked up the stairs. He was less than half a page away from the big gunfight when he heard his wife calling him from the bedroom. "Darling, could you come up and help me?" He was pretty sure that Mike Hammer would avoid being shot anyway, so he folded the corner of the page and placed the paperback on the small table next to the chair. "I'm on my way," he shouted, standing up. He realized something was wrong when he noticed the glow of candles as he walked up the stairs to the bedroom. He had already forgotten about the shootout on page 151, entering the room with a wide smile. Katie stood in the far corner so he could get a good look at the burgundy sheer negligee she was wearing. He bought it for her for Valentine's Day. She sauntered towards him, swaying her hips like a runway model. Her lips curved into a devilish smile as she began to unbutton his shirt. After caressing each other for a long time, they had sex several times in a row. "Oh, God, that was wonderful," she said, still slightly out of breath. "Damn it, darling, that was incredible," he replied with a slight hoarseness in his voice. They both had big smiles on their faces as they hugged each other and drifted off into dreamland. What the... At first, Al thought he was dreaming. His mind was not yet fully aware of what had woken him up. He opened one eye and looked at the nightstand in search of an unpleasant sound. His phone was glowing. He knew it wasn't an alarm clock, which was even more annoying, and the room was still dark. As he swung his legs over the edge and sat down, he felt his wife stir. "Al, what happened?" "I don't know yet," he said, reaching for the phone. "Someone is calling. At this hour." "Hello," he muttered into the phone. A few moments later, Al jumped up and shouted, "I'll be there in 25 minutes. "Al, what's the matter? What's happened?" his frightened wife begged. "Someone tried to burn down the studio," he answered with alarm. "The cops and firefighters are already there." "I'll go with you." "Well, then, hurry up and put on something. We have to go." Thank God the expressways weren't too busy at 3 in the morning. They could see many flashing lights as they got closer. The gray-haired uniformed policeman introduced himself as Sergeant Juergens as they stepped out of the car. "I'm Al Hodges, the owner. This is my wife, Katie." Al was clearly shocked. "Is there a lot of damage there?" "No, almost none. It happened from the back, in the alley. Come on, I'll show you." The sergeant was right. The building was brick and the back door was steel, so except for a small scorch, everything was fine. Al was slightly embarrassed. The policeman seemed to be much more concerned than the minor damage warranted. He had the impression that the good sergeant wanted to talk to him, but not in Katie's presence. He knew she didn't have her keys with her, so he handed her his key ring. "Honey, do me a favor and take one of the officers with you and go inside to make sure nothing was damaged in the studio, okay? I'll be there in a couple of minutes. Just want to check a couple more things here first." "Okay, darling." One of the policewomen standing nearby overheard this conversation and volunteered to accompany her. "So, Sergeant, is there anything you haven't told me?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have any enemies? Maybe you have been playing around with one of the married models?" The question was extremely offensive, and Al was not shy about expressing his feelings. "No, Sergeant," he spat angrily. "I don't fool around with models or anyone else. And what about you? Are you messing around with policewomen like the one who left with my wife?" "I didn't check. Is she married?" Okay, don't make a mountain out of a mountain," growled the man in blue. "Your righteous indignation is duly noted, but someone doesn't like you, and you need to be honest with me. I speak, frankly. They're probably some kids or something like that." "I don't think so." He looked over his shoulder. "Ray," he called to one of the firefighters still hanging around. Would you like to bring this thing over here and show it to Mr. Hodges? You know I can't do that, Sergeant. It's already sealed. Ray, for God's sake, it comes with tissue paper and chewing gum. There's no way this thing will explode. Come on, who knows? Maybe Hodges will see something here that will give him a clue as to who set this up. Ray hesitated. It was against the rules, but the sergeant was right. It shouldn't explode. A fireman brought in a charred, half-burnt box with wires sticking out. What is it? This is a homemade bomb. Luckily for you, whoever put it together didn't know what they were doing. It overheated and caught fire instead of exploding. Bomb? Al muttered in amazement. I swear, I don't have the slightest idea who could do something like that. Yeah, no idea at all, the sergeant asked skeptically. Usually people don't have enemies that they don't know about. I swear to you, I have no idea. The sergeant worked in this position for more than 20 years. He could usually tell when someone was lying. His behavior changed for the better when he decided that Al was telling the truth. Okay, sorry about the joke about the models. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of the truth, for your own safety. Got it, L replied. Look, don't say anything to my wife about this, okay? I don't want to bother her. That's not a good idea, the sergeant replied. I understand your reluctance to bother her, but she could also be a target. We don't know who this person is or why he's focusing on you, but she should be warned so she knows to be vigilant. Al took a deep breath and let it out with a sigh. I guess you're right. When they both entered the studio, Katie and the policewoman were just finishing up their inspection. Honey, from what we saw, I don't think anyone broke in. Nothing was damaged and nothing was missing as far as I could tell, Katie commented. Thank you, dear. You too, officer, he replied. Darling, the sergeant here doesn't believe that what happened was just some kind of childish prank. Looks like someone might have a grudge against me. What? Who? I have no idea, he replied, shaking his head in disbelief. It may not be a big deal, but until we get to the bottom of this, I want you to be careful. Don't approach any unfamiliar cars or anything like that. If you go to lunch, it would be a good idea to take someone with you. Or, better yet, take your lunch with you and eat it at work. Are you serious? It's for the best, Mrs. Hodges, the sergeant added. Katie stood silently for a moment and looked at the two of them. What are you not telling me? It looks like someone tried to blow up this place, honey. What? Oh my God, are you sure? Yes, Al confirmed, nodding slightly. The bomb didn't go off, but it started the fire. Katie's legs felt a little weak, so she sat down while the police sergeant talked to her husband. Do you have any CCTV cameras, Mr. Hodges? In the office? Yes, I turn them on when I leave for the night. I also have a silent alarm connected to you guys, although I have nothing outside. Fine. Listen, this is the kind of business you're in. I'm sure it wouldn't cost you anything to install a couple of hidden cameras somewhere. Yes, that's a good idea. I'll install a pair tomorrow. Good. Well, I see the fire department guys have already left, but the fire inspector will be there in the morning. He looked at the woman in uniform. Are you ready, Officer Dar? Yes, Sergeant, she replied. Al and Katie couldn't do anything else, so they headed home. It was 4:30 when they entered their room. Katie headed straight to the kitchen. I won't be able to sleep anymore tonight. I'm going to make coffee. Make it enough for me, too, Al answered. Meanwhile, he sat in front of the computer and looked at sales of CCTV cameras. They ranged widely in price, from $25 to hundreds, but he was looking for other features as well. Of course, the camera had to be wireless, but he also wanted something weatherproof with night vision and infrared to get a good picture in the dark. Since he was not an electrical engineer, it also had to be easy to install. He found 3 models, any of which would be sufficient. He was still browsing when Katie came and stood next to him. She put her arm around his shoulders and looked at the screen. What are you doing? I want to install cameras as soon as possible. I think I have found what I need. I just wanted to see who was selling them in the area. Coffee is ready? Okay, sweetie. Pour me a cup and I'll be there in a minute. She leaned over and pecked him on the cheek before walking away. "Thank you, honey," he said, joining his wife at the kitchen table. They sat and talked about different things until they both laughed at the sound of the alarm clock coming from the bedroom. "Well, it's time to get up," Al joked. Before leaving for the studio, Al once again reminded his beloved to be careful. Of course, by lunchtime, she had completely forgotten about it. She was able to leave a few minutes early, putting her ahead of the usual crowd. With the car keys in hand, she reached to unlock the door when a man's hand grabbed her wrist tightly and spun her around, pinning her back against the car. Katie's frightened eyes met angry ones. She tried to free her hand, but his grip only tightened. "Tony, you're hurting me. Let me go." He reached out with his other hand and pressed her lips together so that she could not speak. "Obviously, I didn't express myself clearly enough yesterday. Get in my car, bitch. We're going to the apartment." She resisted as he began to drag her towards his car when they heard a voice. "Katie, are you okay?" The figure who had just left the building could see that she was struggling. "Hey, you! Come on! Let her go!" "Get out of here and mind your own business," Tony growled. The lone individual ran back into the building. Tony laughed. "These are your heroes, huh?" Just at that moment, the guy returned with 2 more men, one of whom was a security guard. Tony saw them walking quickly in his direction, so he let go of Katie, jumped into his car, and drove away with the tires squealing. Katie was rubbing her wrist as the men approached her. The guard asked the question first. "Are you okay?" "Yes, thank you, guys." She recognized Tim as the first man to see what was happening and call for backup. He worked in the same company as her. "Are you sure? Who was this guy?" "I don't know. I've never seen him before," she lied. "I think he's just some kind of crazy person." She thanked everyone again and then asked Tim if he would like to have lunch with her. "I'll treat you," she offered. She wasn't sure if Tony was still around, but she didn't want to be caught alone again. Throughout lunch and the rest of the day, Katie wondered why Tony was acting so crazy. Hell, they only had sex 7 or 8 times. She now had a small bruise on her wrist in addition to the bruise on her face, although the new one was barely noticeable and required a good look to see. Earlier that day, Al had been a little intimidated as he opened the studio. He looked around before turning the key. When Michelle came in, about 10 minutes after him, he sat her down and explained what had happened. He asked if she saw anyone or anything suspicious on the way here. She said she didn't notice anything unusual, but he saw fear in her eyes. "Listen, Michelle, why don't you take the day off? Go home, put your feet up on something, and relax. I'll take care of everything here and still pay you." "Al, we have 3 shootings today. I'm not going anywhere." He sighed and tried to show his displeasure, but in truth, he was glad that she did not accept his offer. It was going to be a busy day, and without her help, he would be here until midnight. They were just getting ready for their first shoot when a stranger walked in. Al's first thought was to protect Michelle. Fortunately, this was not necessary, and his nerves calmed when the guy introduced himself. "Mr. Hodges, my name is Pat Sorensen. I'm an inspector assigned to the Chicago Fire Department's arson unit. I understand you had a bit of a problem here last night." Al sighed internally with relief. "Yes, sir, Mr. Sorensen. Apparently someone tried to blow up the building. There is nothing uncertain about this. Someone actually tried. Fortunately, they had no idea what they were doing. They obviously downloaded the schematic from the internet. You can't remember anyone? Maybe some annoyed customer?" "I can't remember a single living soul, Inspector. We don't work with the public. We don't shoot weddings or anything like that. This is a commercial studio. We mainly work with advertising agencies." The inspector looked at Michelle. "What about you, young lady? Can you think of anyone who would like to put this place out of business?" "Not at all," she replied. "Fine. Well, I'm going to go around the back of the house. I'll take a lot of pictures and poke around to see if I missed anything in the dark of the night. Before I leave, I'll stop by one more time. In the meantime, if you remember anything that could help with the investigation, please write it down so you don't forget." "It will be done, Inspector, and thank you," Al said. Later, as Kathy and Al sat at dinner, She asked if there was any new news regarding the bombing attempt. Al told her about the fire inspector before asking her about her day. Katie left out the part with Tony and only mentioned that the company exceeded its quota for the quarter. Al mentioned that he had ordered some outdoor cameras from Amazon and would install them as soon as they arrived the next day. The next morning, Diana waited impatiently in the office for her friend's arrival. She pounced on Katie as soon as she sat down at her desk. "So, spit it out," she demanded. "It spread throughout the building that you were attacked yesterday during lunch break. What the hell is going on? And don't you dare say you handled it because you obviously didn't." Katie sighed. She didn't really want to tell anyone, but Diana was a trusted friend. "Okay, let's have lunch at Plato's and I'll tell you everything." Over the next few hours, Katie found it difficult to concentrate on her work. She was really looking forward to talking with Diana. She had been keeping her secret for the past few months and felt so guilty that maybe letting go of the burden would bring her a little relief. The two ladies sat down and waited for the waitress to take their orders before Diana began her interrogation. "Okay, if it wasn't Al who gave you a black eye, then someone else did. I believe you have a boyfriend." Katie sighed mentally. No one ever accused Diana of being stupid. "Yes, but you have to promise that you will never tell anyone about this. I already broke up with him, and I'm sorry this even started." "Who is he? Someone I know?" Katie lowered her voice. "No, I don't think you know him." She hesitated again. Promise that you won't tell anyone about this." "I promise," Deanna replied. "I would never do anything to hurt you, you know." "I know, it's just that." She paused for just a second before allowing herself to confess to her friend. "His name is Tony Belshaw. My friend introduced us over lunch." "What kind of girlfriend is this?" Diana said sarcastically. "Oh, I'm sure Audrey has no idea what he's really like." At first, he comes across as a really cool guy. He's cute, funny, and oozes personality from every pore. There's also something dangerous about him. Something like a bad boy in a three-piece suit. Diana was determined not to judge, but she simply couldn't help herself. "Kat, I still don't understand how you got into bed with this guy when there's a guy like Al waiting for you at home." "I know," she replied sadly, "but it wasn't really my idea. At least not at first. He practically took me by force the first time it happened. I was at Carl's diner eating lunch alone when he walked in and noticed me. He didn't even ask permission and just sat down. 5 minutes later, he started pestering me. It took me a couple of minutes to try to figure out how I planned to handle this. I had no intention of having sex with him, but at the same time, I was attracted to him. I excused myself and went to the ladies' room to think. I wasn't there very long and decided to just tell him I was happily married and hoped he wouldn't continue like that. But when I left, he was waiting for me in the hallway. He grabbed my wrists and pinned them to the wall above my head, and then kissed me hard. He then crossed my wrists and held them together with one hand while he lifted my skirt with the other. He put his hand under my skirt and started caressing me. Lord, Katie, why didn't you scream that you were being raped? I know, I should have stopped him immediately, but I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I'm sure he saw fear in my eyes. I think he liked it because he smiled and kissed me again. You should have kicked him between the legs. I know. I didn't think so. My mind was in some kind of fog. So, what happened? Katie hesitated. Admitting what happened next was excruciating. Despite the fear, I was also excited. He obviously sensed how much it was and took it as an invitation. He dragged me into the men's room and pushed me down onto one of the sinks. I just stood there, frozen in place, while he pulled down his panties. Katie, how could you let him? She stopped mid-sentence, seeing the shame on her friend's face. I was just so, I don't know, I guess you would say stunned. Everything happened so quickly, and he was so controlling, and I felt helpless. Jesus, Katie, you should have gone to the police. It's too late now, Katie replied. Not at all, did he hit you then? Katie shook her head. This happened a few months ago. That's what I mean when I say it's too late. Diana had a hard time putting two and two together. If it happened so long ago, why did he slap her a couple of days ago? Then it dawned on her. You didn't sleep with him, did you? Not after all this. I was asleep, she answered. I know how wrong it was, but it was so damn exciting, at least in the beginning. He was just so strong, so dominant. I always felt so helpless. Who can blame me for having sex with someone if I can't do anything to stop it? It was like a role-playing game, at least that's how I looked at it. Tony, however, took it much more seriously. He has a key to some friend's apartment which he can use during the day when his friend is at work. It is not far from here. About a week after we had sex in a restaurant, he was waiting for me in the parking lot at lunchtime. He made me follow him to the apartment. There he was, no more gentle than the first time, but we had a bed and more privacy. The first time we got there, he ordered me to undress in front of him, while he sat and watched me. God, Dee, it was so... I don't know how to explain it. My hands shook as I unbuttoned my blouse. When I was naked, he ordered me to put my hands down at my sides and just stand there for a minute while he looked at me. After he undressed, we had sex in several positions. I hate to admit it, but I really enjoyed both times. Oh, Katie, was all her friend could say. I know, you can't imagine how guilty I felt afterwards. Why did he slap you? Well, we've done it a few more times over the past few weeks, but after a while he started getting really possessive. He kept telling me that I was his woman now, that I belonged to him and all that. It was a little confusing. I didn't know if he was serious or just role-playing, but I decided that I would end it with him. A few days later, he met me again in the parking lot, but I told him I had a business lunch and couldn't go with him. I don't know if he was angry or what, but the next day, he told me that I had to sleep with his friend to let us use the apartment. Then he said that I was no longer allowed to have sex with Al. Can you imagine the impudence? And what did you say? I was afraid to say anything. I decided that from now on I would just avoid him, and eventually he would accept it. I started parking my car on the street instead of in the lot, and used the south entrance of the building to come and go. This also worked until recently. And then, he slapped you? Yes. He followed me to Denny's. I didn't even see him until he sat down. He was angry as hell and asked why I was avoiding him and not answering his text messages. I said it's over. I wasn't going to stop having sex with Al, and I certainly wasn't going to sleep with his boyfriend. That's when he slapped me. The waitress saw this, grabbed a couple of guys at the counter and told him to leave. A little later, when I finished eating, one of the guys walked me to the car. What are you going to do? Judging by that little scene in the parking lot yesterday, it doesn't look like he's going to give up. I don't know. And now I might have an even bigger problem. What's the problem? The night before yesterday, someone tried to blow up Al's studio. What? Oh my God, is he okay? Yes, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Al and I were in bed when the cops called. The bomb turned out to be faulty, but I can only think of one person who could have done something like that. You don't mean Tony, do you? Who else? Al has no enemies in the whole world. Tony is the only one, in my opinion, who has a motive, or at least he thinks so. Oh, Katie, you should go to the police. Next time, he might come for Al in person, or maybe for you again. I don't know what to do, Dee. You're right, I know I have to talk to the police, but then they'll talk to Al. He will find out about my affair and my marriage will end. God, she said, looking up with tears in her eyes. Why did I even do this? It was so stupid. Diana had no words of wisdom, no words of comfort. Her friend was hurt, but she hurt herself. She knew her heart should be breaking with sympathy, but part of her said, "You brought this on yourself, stupid." She reached across the table and took Katie's hand. "It will come out anyway, you know." Katie nodded, but the tears began to flow more heavily, and it became difficult for her to speak. "Honey, if I were you, I wouldn't let Al find out about this from the cops. This will make everything even worse. You'll have to confess. You have to tell him. If you remain silent and something happens to Al, you will never forgive yourself." I know. God, Diana, I've never even thought about cheating on Al before. I can't believe I got myself into this mess. I'm so scared. I know I'm going to lose him, she said, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. I wish I could say a few comforting words to you, Kat, but I don't have them. You made a mistake, a big mistake, and now you have to face the consequences. I know, she sniffed. I'll tell him tonight when he gets home. Oh, Diana, I'm so scared. I don't think my marriage will survive. Diana inhaled and exhaled with a sigh. I don't know what to tell you, Kat. From what you're saying, it sounds like it's going to come out one way or another. I actually think it's better to try to leave early. Katie was still wiping her eyes. Can you do me a favor, Dee? Will you tell me at work that I got sick and went home? I can't go back there right now. I need some time to get ready. Of course, Kat. Do you think you'll come tomorrow? I don't know, she said. It depends on how things go tonight. The friends paid and went in different directions. Katie had never felt such an intense feeling of fear in her life. Back home, Katie didn't even think about making Al his favorite meal or any other way to soften the blow. He would see this as a trivial attempt to minimize her wrongdoing. I cheated on you, but I cooked your favorite dinner to make up for it. No, that won't work at all. What she was really contemplating was whether to try to suppress her emotions or not. Either way, she wasn't sure she could talk to him without crying her eyes out, but should she try? Would showing yourself as a strong woman, determined to never do anything like that again, be more convincing than simply showing your shame and despair? Al was a strong person himself and admired strength in others, but in this case, wouldn't he see it as her being unrepentant? She had no idea and could not imagine how to even start a conversation. Her eyes began to water. As she sat, Katie thought about the end of her marriage, but what was even worse was how it would affect Al. She could only imagine the pain she would cause if the roles were reversed. What if he had changed it? How would she feel? Just the thought of it broke her heart. She tried in vain to think of a way to soften the blow, but it was no use. No matter how many times she ran through different scenarios in her mind, nothing could save her marriage or Al's feelings. She looked at her phone and saw that it was already 4 o'clock. She really didn't want to cook. She wanted to cry. She wanted to go upstairs and lie on the bed and cry her eyes out. That's what she wanted. All she could think about was sending Al a message. Hello, dear. Is there anything new about the explosion? She was surprised when he answered just a few minutes later. He was usually very busy, and sometimes it took him several hours to answer her. Hello, honey? No, I didn't hear anything. Do you mind if we order pizza? I'm feeling a little out of sorts, and I don't feel like cooking tonight. I'm fine with that, honey. I should be home around 6. How about if I grab it on the way? It would be great. Can I buy you something at the pharmacy? No, thank you, dear. I feel a little stupid, but I'll be okay. Love you. I love you too. Diana was slightly surprised to see her friend come to work the next morning. I didn't think you'd come today, she said, pulling Katie to the corner of the room and speaking quietly. How did everything go? I couldn't do it, Dee. I chickened out. Okay, maybe that's good, Diana replied. Come after me. Katie followed her friend into the ladies' room. Diana looked under the doors of each stall to make sure they were alone before speaking. Yesterday evening, I talked to my daughter. She works for the judge, and she said you should get a restraining order. It's simple. There are only a couple of forms that you download from the internet. Fill them out and send them to the county clerk's office. That's all. And when you're done, text that asshole and tell him what you did. Tell him he'll be arrested if he bothers you or Al again. I highly doubt he'll bother you after this, not after he knows he'll be arrested. You could even mention that you know he was the one who tried to blow up Al's studio. But I don't know that... I'm not sure. You said to yourself that Al had no enemies. Who else could it be? Worth a try. I swear, Dee, if I come out of this with my marriage intact, I will never, ever even look at another man again as long as I live. That afternoon, Katie went to HR and said she was still not feeling well and asked to be allowed to go home. She wanted to make sure she got home before Al. She logged into her laptop, downloaded the forms she needed, filled them out, and stuffed them into her purse. Then she looked where the nearest county courthouse was. The next day, she called again, saying she was sick, to complete the paperwork. She found the building without difficulty. The officer standing at the entrance directed her to the administrator's office. She felt her heart pounding as she stood in the short line. She continued to say a silent prayer, getting closer with each step as the people in front of her were served. "Please let this work. Please let this work." "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Katie walked over and placed the forms in front of her. "Yes, ma'am. I want to file this and get a restraining order," she nervously told the older woman behind the desk. The woman looked at the affidavit and handed it back to Katie. "Go there, to the entrance," she said, pointing her hand to the side. "I'll ask someone to help you." Katie thanked the woman and headed towards the entrance when the woman called Aaron. A tall man, who looked to be in his 30s, opened the gate for her and asked Katie to follow him to his desk. "So, how can I help?" he asked as they both sat down. A man is harassing me and my husband. I want to get a restraining order against him." "Okay, is this an affidavit?" he asked, nodding at the papers Katie was holding. "Oh, yes. Sorry," she said, handing him the documents. "Okay, let's see what we have here. Miss Hodges," he said, starting to read. "Has this Tony ever touched you or your husband? Ever had physical intimacy?" He stopped for a second. "Alan Hodges? Is your husband a photographer?" Katie's heart sank. There are more than 2 million people in Chicago, and she is faced with someone who knows her husband? She'd been nervous before, but now she almost broke out in a cold sweat. She didn't know how to respond, but before she knew it, she heard the words leave her lips. "Yes, it's him," she said without even realizing it. Now she had to deal with the consequences. "How do you know him?" she asked. "My wife works as a part-time model. She worked with him several times. She really likes him and says that she would like all her photographers to be as professional as his." Katie smiled nervously, but couldn't think of anything to say. She was glad that he only knew Al through his wife and was confident that her secret would remain safe. "Sorry," the young man apologized. "I didn't want to go off topic. I was wondering if Tony ever had physical intimacy with you or your husband?" She had already told the police that she had no idea who might have blown up Al's studio, and she wasn't sure it was him, so she wasn't going to mention it. "He once gave me a slap in the face. Not very strong, but it gave me acute pain. I didn't tell all about it because I didn't want him to go after Tony and possibly get in trouble." "Okay," he said, making a note in the corner of the statement. "Anything else?" "No, it was only once, but he won't leave me alone." "How do you know him?" "He works with my friend. He sat down at our table while we were having lunch. Since then, he has been trying to get me to sleep with him. I continue to refuse, but he becomes more and more insistent." "Has he ever followed your husband, tried to confront him or start a fight with him?" "No, I don't think he'll dare, but I don't want to risk it." "Mrs. Hodges, does all know this guy is hitting on you?" "No, I'm just worried that he'll follow him and end up in jail. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't tell your wife about this." "No, of course not," he confirmed. "Okay, this will be filed in the 3rd District Court tomorrow morning. Anthony Belshaw will not be allowed to come within 30 meters of you or your husband. If he approaches you, call 911 immediately and he will be arrested for stalking." Suddenly it felt like someone had lifted the weight of the world off her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Aaron Nelson. My wife's name is Peggy, if this ever comes up," he said with a smile. Katie thanked him again and left the building, feeling better than she had in days. She couldn't wait to write to her opponent. "Tony, I just filed a restraining order against you. If you come within 30 meters of me, I will have you arrested. I'm sure you don't want your wife bailing you out of jail, so leave me alone." She was relieved when he didn't answer. "I'll have to treat Diana to lunch," she thought with a smile. Diana was glad to see Katie at work the next day. She was already starting to worry. "So, did you do it? Got a restraining order?" "Yes, I did," she replied with a wide smile. "Lunch for you and your daughter at my expense, if she can join us." Evie works in the city center. She would never do this, but I will take note. Diana replied with a smile. Have you sent that bastard an email yet? I sent him an SMS. He didn't call me back, so I hope I heard the last of him. Okay? I hope you were serious about never looking at another man again. I swear to God, Dee, she said, raising her right hand to swear. I learned my lesson. Never again. Katie checked her phone again at the end of the day, but there was still no word from the asshole. By the time she returned home, she felt on top of the world. She was in the kitchen, humming and purring to herself, when Al walked in. He chuckled as he walked toward the kitchen door. Wow, someone feels happy, he joked. She came up, hugged his neck, and looked into his blue eyes. Why not? Look who I'm married to, she said, before French kissing him. Katie couldn't wait for Al to go to bed after dinner. She needed to feel committed to her marriage again. Even if he didn't realize it, it was necessary. Necessary to show her husband that she belonged to him and him alone. Later that night, she literally turned him inside out. It was an extremely enjoyable night for both of them, even if it was for different reasons. Of course, only Diana knew why, but several of Katie's co-workers noted her playful behavior over the next week. The smile never left her face throughout the day, and nightly workouts in the bedroom with Al only contributed to this. By the next weekend, Katie had left Tony as a bad, distant memory. It wasn't until the following Tuesday that he punctured her balloon. That day, she was sitting at her desk when she heard her phone ringing about a text message. She finished what she was working on before checking on it a few minutes later. She almost felt the color drain from her face as the photograph stared back at her. Katie instinctively clutched the phone to her chest and quickly glanced around to make sure no one else had seen her before, stuffing the phone back into her purse and heading straight to the women's restroom. She walked into the first stall and locked the door behind her, lowering the toilet lid and sitting down before her legs gave way. Katie took a couple of deep breaths before pulling her phone out of her purse and looking at the disgusting photo again. Most of her body was covered, but her face was very visible as she looked at a naked man who was clearly having sex with her. She knew it was fake. Tony was the only man she'd been with since she married Al, and it wasn't Tony. Of course not. He would never have sent his photo, but she knew that he was the one who sent it. There was no one else who would have done this. She was so angry, she didn't even realize the risk she was taking by calling him from a public restroom. She could practically hear the smirk on his face as he answered. "You know that my husband is a photographer," she almost screamed. "He will just look at this photo and immediately understand that it is a fake." "Katie, I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds like we should discuss this in person, at lunch tomorrow at Plato's." The connection ended before she could say anything else. "Damn him," she mentally cursed. "What kind of mess is this?" she thought. He knew she would do almost anything to protect her marriage, and used that as leverage. She was so quiet that night that Al wondered if there was some problem. She told him she was just tired and had a few problems at work that she was dealing with. He, of course, accepted her explanation and offered any help he could provide, but she refused, saying that she would sort everything out. She slept very little that night, but by morning she had a plan. Al always left home for work long before she did. This gave her the opportunity to go into their home office and grab the mini digital voice recorder Al was using to take notes. She'd seen him use it enough times to know that there were different channels she could record on. She found an empty one and set it to record with the press of a button. When Katie arrived at work, she enlisted the help of her friend. Diana didn't really want to get involved in this matter. Of course, she didn't want this creep to harass her either, but Katie assured that this wouldn't happen. Shortly after noon, Katie sat nervously at Plato's waiting for her tormentor, and as soon as she saw him pull into the parking lot, she reached into her purse and turned on the recording device. He literally made her skin crawl as she watched him strut over to her table and sit down. He did not pay any attention to the woman sitting alone at the next table. Katia leaned forward and lowered her voice to greet him. "You really are a piece of shit, you know that?" He smiled silently. "Give me your purse," he demanded. "What?" "My Percy. Why?" "Just give it to me," he repeated. No, I won't give you my Percy. Give me your Percy, or this meeting will end, and your husband will receive the photos by email before he gets home tonight. She knew this moment would come and thought about what she should do. She reluctantly handed him her purse. Katie's phone was sitting right on top of everything else. A wide smile stretched across Tony's face when he saw that the recording function was activated and knew he had outsmarted her. He picked up the phone and turned off the recorder. Katie lowered her head as if she had just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Did you really think I was stupid enough to let you record our conversation?" He grinned, returning her purse. Katie tried her best to keep the smile off her lips. Thanks to her husband's penchant for Sherlock Holmes mysteries, she learned that if someone is looking for something, they stop looking as soon as they think they have found it. To protect something valuable, leave it in plain sight and then hide the bait. "That photo won't do you any good," Katie told him. "You know that my husband is a photographer. In 2 seconds, he will realize that the photo is fake." "I don't think so. I paid good money to a professional graphic artist to do this. He assured me that no one could refute anything even under a microscope." Just then, the waitress came and took their orders. Katie ordered a salad, but Tony only ordered coffee. They resumed their conversation as soon as she left. "Tony, I will not be your sex slave." "Then most likely you won't be married for long," he replied. "Listen, Brian." "Who is Brian?" They fell silent when the waitress returned with Katie's salad and Tony's coffee, waited until she was out of earshot, and continued. "Brian is the guy whose apartment we used. He is a bachelor. He has no problem telling your husband that you two have been having mind-blowing sex for months. I even told him enough about what you do in bed to be convincing. Trust me, along with the photo, it will completely convince your hubby that he is married to a cheater." A chill ran down Katie's spine. She was just praying that her ace in the hole would work. "By the way, he's starting to worry," Tony continued. "He's looking forward to getting you into bed." "I'm not your slut," she said. "Oh no," he replied. "You are she." "Brian and I were talking about a threesome. I'm even going to use you to make a few of my clients happy from time to time." Ace or no ace, she couldn't hold back her tears as she listened to what he had planned for her. "Now," he said, finishing his coffee, "you will be in the apartment tomorrow at noon, or Brian will send this photo to your husband along with enough details about your skills in bed to make him believe." With tears running down her cheeks, Katie nodded her head. "I'll let you pay for the coffee," he said, standing up to leave. "Remember, it's noon, don't be late." "Oh." He leaned closer so only Katie could hear him. "And I want this fucking restraining order lifted this afternoon." With these parting words, he left. Katie watched out the window as he pulled out of the parking lot. "Jesus, what an asshole," Diana grumbled, approaching Katie's table. "Did we get the recording?" "Oh yeah, I kept watching to make sure it was still recording." "Just in case. I also had the voice recorder on my phone turned on." She handed Katie the digital voice recorder, which had been standing at the nearest edge of Diana's desk all this time. Katie pressed stop, then rewind, then play. There was some background noise, but Tony's voice was loud and clear. She recorded the entire conversation on tape, every threatening syllable. She breathed a sigh of relief when she realized that she had it in her hands. Under the guise of asking what he wanted for dinner, Katie called Al as soon as she got back to the office. After he made a couple of suggestions, she asked what time he would be home. He said he was very busy and would be there around 7. This gave her time to do what she needed to do, but just in case, she wondered if she could get out a little early. She knocked on her boss's door and entered, receiving his invitation. "Hal, I have some personal matters that I need to take care of. Would you mind if I leave around 4 today?" "Before you go, I need Jenkins' proposal," he replied. "I already put it on your table earlier. You were talking on the phone, but I thought you saw me. This is all in a red folder." He picked it up and looked through it. "Yes, it looks good. Okay, since all your work is done, I have no problem." "Thank you, Hal. I'll contact you before I leave." At her husband's request, she had to stop for pork chops on the way home, but she arrived at the house at 4:45. She sprinkled some seasoning on the chops and left them on the counter while she walked into their home office. She grabbed 2 flash drives from the closet at work and made copies of the conversation before deleting it from Al's recorder, before plugging one of them into the computer and cutting out the best parts of Tony's threats, then creating an audio file and emailing it to him. Tony, you're not as smart as you think. If you don't want your wife and kids to know what an asshole you really are, then you will leave me alone and never contact me again. The same goes for your asshole friends. She texted along with a copy of the audio file and, deciding that she now had it in her fist, sighed with relief. She felt sorry for the next married woman he picked up and wished there was a way to warn the entire female population of the city. In the meantime, she simply agrees to get rid of this vile creature. Once again, Al was the unsuspecting but happy beneficiary of his wife's victory. That night she did everything she could to kill him with erotic and carnal passions. It was already past 1 in the morning when she finally snuggled into his arms, and they fell into a deep, rich sleep. Unfortunately, their post-coital sleep was short-lived. Ugh, what now? Al muttered, waking up. It took him a second to identify the annoying sound. It was his phone. Damn, not again? It wasn't even 4 o'clock yet, and he knew whoever was calling wouldn't have good news. Katie stirred as he got out of bed and walked over to the dresser to take his phone off the charger. What's happened? She asked. I don't know yet, he answered. Hello? Katie sat and watched his face while Al listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. She could tell from the look on his face that things weren't going well. Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes, he finally said. Studio again? Yes, it was the cops. Another bomb. This time it exploded and caused some damage. I'm coming with you, she announced, throwing the sheet off her naked body. When they arrived, the sight was familiar. Only this time they both smelled smoke. The policeman was different, but the same routine, the same questions. Again, both Al and Kathy told officers they couldn't think of anyone who would do such a thing. Once the firefighters told them everything was fine, Al led a small delegation of police and firefighters inside where they could assess the damage. Luckily, the damage was contained to the back of the building, away from the studio and all its expensive lighting and cameras. The back door was ripped off its hinges, pieces pierced the ceiling and disabled the office computer, coffee maker, and several other items. A filing cabinet was knocked over by the explosion, and some documents were destroyed due to water damage. I think it could be worse, Al said, looking around the mess. Mr. Hodges, I was told that this has been tried before, and you said that you were going to install several surveillance cameras. Did you do it? Asked the duty officer in uniform. Yes, I did, but I put them into this computer, he said, pointing to a broken pile of garbage lying on the floor. They, however, also have mini SD cards inside each device. I would be grateful if you would give them to me. I will take them to our laboratory, where they can be examined by our IT forensics team, the officer asked. Yes, of course, Al agreed. I'll go and bring them to you right now. It was almost 7 in the morning when Al and Katie returned home. Al took a shower, grabbed a cup of coffee, and came right back. He had to call the insurance company and start repairs. He also wanted to get there before Michelle, so that she wouldn't walk into the chaos without knowing the situation. Again, after explaining what had happened, Al told her to go home, and, as before, she refused. Al took photos of all the damage to the office before he and Michelle began cleaning up. Meanwhile, Katie was at home, nervously getting ready for work. She wanted to leave, but she had already missed so much that she did not dare to call. Diana knew something was wrong even before Katie reached her desk. You look exhausted, Diana said to her friend. Yes, I didn't get enough sleep last night. Oh, I see, Diana admitted with a smile, having received the wrong impression. Katie realized what she was thinking. No, it's not. She stopped and looked around. Let's go to the ladies' room. Once they were sure they were alone, Katie's eyes filled with tears as she burst out, Oh, Dee, Al's studio was bombed again last night. Oh, no. And you think it was Tony? I just don't know who else it could be, Dee. I can't believe he took that risk. Maybe his marriage isn't as important to him as I thought. I just wanted to know for sure if it was him, she sniffled. Kat, who else? Look at the time. You drove him into a corner with this tape. This was probably his way of warning you that he was ready to go after Al next. Katie, you have to tell Al. You have to warn him. Oh, Dee, I can't, Katie cried. I'm definitely going to lose him. I don't know him that well, and maybe he'll forgive you. I don't know. But if you don't warn him and something happens to him, you'll never forgive yourself, Kat. I know, she sobbed. You're right. Oh, Diana. What should I do? Diana hugged her distraught friend as she broke down and burst into tears. You have to do the right thing, darling. No more lies. You have to tell him the truth. Katie knew her friend was right, but that didn't make it any easier. The rest of the day, she wandered around like a zombie. Luckily, there wasn't anything too pressing that she had to deal with. Her ride home wasn't much better. She sped right through the stop sign at the end of their street and didn't even realize it until she heard the horn of a car that actually had the right of way. As she opened the door and walked inside, a sudden feeling of loneliness came over her. It was so quiet, so empty and silent, just a prophecy of her future. Still in a fog of thought, she packed her things and went to the kitchen. She took the dinner casserole out of the refrigerator and set it on the table before warming up a cup of leftover coffee for herself in the microwave. By the time she sat down at the kitchen table to contemplate her inevitable confession and its consequences, more tears were streaming down her cheeks. Katie, what happened? The worried tone of her husband's voice interrupted her thoughts. The untouched cup of now cold coffee was still on the table. The casserole was still on the counter. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Her palms were sweating as she looked up at his face. I'm so sorry, she cried in tears. I'm so sorry, Al. Having no idea what she was talking about, he rushed to his sobbing wife and hugged her. Honey, what's the matter? Talk to me, honey. Are you okay? Shaking her head with self-contempt and guilt for her actions, she finally admitted, I know who blew up your studio. His name is Tony Belshaw. We... It was difficult for her to say. She looked at her stunned husband. Please don't hate me, Al. Please. We had an affair, she exclaimed before covering her face with both hands as her crying intensified. She felt his embrace immediately loosen. What? What are you talking about? Did you have an affair? Without opening her face, she nodded her head. Al walked over and sat down on the chair on the other side of the table. And you think it was he who blew up my studio? This time she lowered her hands and looked up to answer him. I tried to break up with him, but he won't take no for an answer. I tried to threaten him and even blackmail him, but he would not back down. I'm pretty sure that bomb was a threat directed at me. He lets me know that if I don't do what he says, he'll come for you next. I'm so sorry, Al. I didn't mean to hurt you. I tried everything to keep you from finding out. But I had to warn you. I couldn't let you get hurt. Al remembered her broken face. Did he give you a black eye? She looked up in surprise. Yes, she admitted. He slapped me the first time I told him it was over. How do you know? That story about getting hit by the bathroom door just sounded a little weird. I didn't question it at the time because I had no reason not to trust you. They both fell into oppressive silence as they each weighed the consequences of Katie's confession. Finally, Al broke the silence. His voice was emotionless. We caught a terrorist this afternoon, he said decisively. His statement brought his wife out of her stupor. Did they catch him? Did they catch Tony? She screamed. No, they caught Steve McElroy. He's Michelle's boyfriend, or at least he was her boyfriend. He was jealous of the hours she spent with me, and he didn't like that she was alone with me all the time. He tried to scare her so that she would leave. She identified him from the surveillance cameras I installed. I was going to tell you the good news when I came in, but I completely forgot about it when I saw you crying. Katie instantly realized that she had just made the second biggest mistake of her life. The first is to succumb to Tony's advances. The second is her recognition. She still grabbed him. She held Tony in her fist. If she had just kept her mouth shut, she could have gotten away with it. She burst into sobs again, but this time Al didn't try to console her. Instead, he rose from his chair and left the house. She didn't even realize he was gone until she heard him start the car. By the time she reached the door, he was already walking away. There was only one place where he felt safe: the studio. The back door and one of the windows were boarded up, and the foul smell of burning still hung in the air, but this was his sanctuary nonetheless. Almost unconsciously, he opened a new pack of Mr. Coffee to brew a fresh pot of coffee and sat down in his office chair. Michelle worked on it for over an hour to get rid of the smell. He needed something to occupy his mind. He wasn't ready to come to terms with Katie's infidelity yet, so he took his cup into the dark room to review the day's footage again. Realizing that he had been staring at the same image for 20 minutes, he gave up and returned to the locker room. There, he had a sofa for the models to relax between shoots. He stretched out, one foot still on the floor, and covered his eyes with his hand, blocking out the bright light of the street lamps. A tangle of thoughts swirled in his head, tossing between forgiveness and divorce. It was all so tiring. Katie had no illusions about continuing their marriage. She knew her husband quite well. He was an honest and fair man. He knew people were people and made mistakes, but he would never trust her again. And she knew he wouldn't commit himself to someone he couldn't trust. With this knowledge, she went to bed early and cried herself to sleep. The next morning, two people who had been happily married for many years woke up feeling miserable and alone. Michelle realized this within minutes of arriving at the studio. Al assured her that none of this had anything to do with her or her boyfriend, but was not prepared to answer any questions or explain his situation. Katie, however, needed an outlet. She poured out her heart to Diana, who felt partially responsible for her friend's situation. After all, she was the one who encouraged Katie to confess everything. "Don't be upset, Diana," Katie told her. "I was thinking about this last night. I don't think I could have kept it from Al anyway. He's a good man, Dee, and he deserves the truth. I screwed up and it will cost me dearly, but I have no one to blame but myself." Katie had a hard time getting through the day again, but at least she obeyed the traffic rules on the way home. When she pulled up, she was surprised and excited to see Al's car in the driveway. She expected to see him gathering clothes, either his or hers, when he walked in, but instead, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a beer in his hand. Every nerve in her body stood on end as she carefully joined him. "We need to talk," he said as she took a clean cup from the cabinet. "I know," she agreed. She poured the remains of her morning coffee into a cup and popped it into the microwave before brewing some fresh coffee. When she finished, she took her reheated coffee and sat down at the table. A tear broke through her lower eyelid as both eyes filled with fear of what was about to happen. "First of all, Katie, I want to know about this guy you slept with. Did you say he hit you?" "Yeah, I really think this guy is a little crazy," she replied, nodding her head. "Please, Al, don't mess with him. I honestly don't know what he's capable of. You said he hit you when you told him it was all over, and before that he hit you?" "No, but he was always a little scary. He practically forced me the first time." "What do you mean, practically forced you?" She told him how Tony first cornered her in the hallway outside the men's room, then dragged her inside and forced her. "And did it turn you on?" he asked in surprise. However, in all the years he had known her, he had never seen anything to indicate that she was submissive. That was exciting, Al. I can't explain it. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I should have turned around and kneed him between the legs. I should have called the police. I should have tried harder to stop him. But when it was over, all I could do was stand there, trying to catch my breath. To tell you the truth, he was so strong, so physical that first time that I didn't think of it as infidelity. But I knew that if I told you about it, I'd have to go to the police, and I really didn't. Wanted to do this. After that, I didn't see or hear from him for a whole week, and then one afternoon he met me in the parking lot and told me to follow him. I knew I shouldn't, but I really thought we'd just have lunch. However, instead of stopping at the restaurant, we went to his friend's apartment. This was a moment of epiphany for me. I knew I would be breaking our wedding vows if I went inside with him. Heaven help me, I just couldn't find the willpower to stop. At first it was like a game, like a role-playing game. He was a powerful sheikh and I was his prisoner, but every time we were together, he became more and more controlling, and it didn't take long before I got tired of being his sex slave, she said sarcastically. Then, after our last meeting, he said that I was no longer allowed to have sex with you. He also wanted me to thank his friend for allowing us to use his apartment. This was the last straw. After that, I ignored his texts and thought I would just stay away from him until he gave up. But one day he caught me at a restaurant having lunch. That's when he slapped me, after I told him it was over. In a restaurant? In front of witnesses? Al gasped. Yes, she confirmed. I'm telling you, Al, I don't think he's in his right mind. Either way, I wasn't going to let it happen again, so I got him a restraining order. Al sat and listened, and could not understand how all this could happen right under his nose without his knowledge. He took a deep breath and exhaled his naivety. He crushed the empty beer can and threw it in the trash before walking over to the coffee pot. And what? He asked, standing with his back to his wife and pouring himself a cup of coffee. What happened after that? He asked, returning to the table and sitting down. You said you tried to blackmail him, so I guess the restraining order didn't work. Sitting there and answering his questions was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. She saw the pain and disappointment on his face, but the time for lies and secrets was over. No, he paid some guy to take a photo of me supposedly having sex with his buddy and said he'd send it to you if I didn't do what he wanted. He told me to meet him at the restaurant the next day to discuss his terms. Diana from work was with me, sitting at the next table with a digital voice recorder. After Tony threatened me with the photo again, he started bragging about all the disgusting and vile things he and his buddy were going to do to me, and we recorded it all. I sent him a copy and threatened to send it to his wife if he didn't leave me alone once and for all. It was the same evening when your studio was blown up. That's why I was so sure it was him. The match was simply too perfect. I knew confessing would ruin our marriage, but I just couldn't let you get hurt, Al. Well, I appreciate your concern for my health. I wish you cared as much about our marriage or my feelings. You're right, Kat. You actually ruined our marriage. I think we both understand that I could never live with someone I didn't trust, and after hearing about everything you did behind my back, keeping me completely in the dark, I would never do anything again. I will trust you. Even though she knew this moment was inevitable, the moment when the man she loved confirmed the unthinkable, it still felt like he had just plunged a dagger into her heart. And again, she burst into tears. I'm sorry, Al, she cried. I'm very, very sorry. I'm sorry I ever met this idiot. I'm sorry that I broke your heart. And I'm sorry that I ruined what we had with you. If you forgive me, dear. Using her usual affectionate address to him, she realized that this could be the last time, and it was too much for her. She turned and ran out of the room without saying another word. Al heard her run up the stairs and slam the bedroom door. He heard the creak of springs above him as she flopped onto the mattress and her uncontrollable sobs. He had already shed tears last night and was determined to remain stoic and composed while he was here, but his grief was palpable. He reached out and wiped the salty drops of grief from his face. He looked out the kitchen window and saw the light turn from day to night and sighed at the thought that this was a metaphor for his marriage, and then continued to watch how the darkness of the night slowly squeezed the life out of the shining sun. After a while, Al woke up to the fact that he was still staring into the now pitch-black void. He listened, but heard only silence. She stopped crying. He quietly walked up the stairs and looked in on his future ex-wife. She stretched out diagonally across the bed and obviously cried herself to sleep. He looked at the clock on the bedside table. It was just after 8 and neither of them had eaten yet. It was too late to start cooking anything. 40 minutes later, he returned from their favorite Chinese restaurant with takeout. "Katie, Katie," he called quietly, shaking her shoulder. "Come on, wake up. Dinner is waiting downstairs." She opened her eyes and forced herself to smile sadly. "Okay, let me wash my face and I'll be down in a minute." When she joined him, there were plates and 2 glasses of wine on the table. They sat in silence for most of dinner. Katie spoke first. "I know I already said, Al, but I really regret what I did. I don't think you'll ever be able to forgive me. Maybe only if we go to couples therapy. I thought about it, Kat. I really thought about it a lot. But it wouldn't make any difference. I absolutely despise what you did behind my back." Do you despise me?" she asked sadly. "No, I don't despise you. I probably still love you to some extent. It's hard to say. Right now, I'm overwhelmed with emotion. I really don't know how I feel, but I actually look at you differently. You are no longer the person I put on a pedestal. Maybe it's unfair. After all, we are all human and we all make mistakes. But don't we put the person on a pedestal when we fall in love? I just never thought you were capable of such deception. I honestly didn't know you had that in you. I was desperate, Al. I tried to save our marriage. The time for that was before you spread your legs for that guy, Katie," he snapped. His harsh words brought another sob from his wife, but he continued, "Katie, knowing what I now know means that my entire perception of you since we met has been wrong. I don't think there is a therapist in the world who could convince me that you are the woman I thought I married. I'm sorry, Katie, but what we had is over." She knew him well enough to almost guess what he was going to say, word for word, but she had to ask. She wanted to burst into tears again, but there were no tears left. "So where do we go from here?" "I will look for a lawyer and start a divorce, but I'm in no hurry. I think we should wait until our emotions calm down a little before we decide what is fair. We still have that old sofa bed in the basement. I'll set it up in my home office and sleep there." "You can sleep in the bed, Al. I don't mind." "I don't think it's a good idea, but we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, I need your contact information for this Tony character. I also want to know what he looks like." "What?" There was real fear in her voice. "Please, Al, don't mess with him. I swear he went crazy. Just leave it as it is. This idiot dragged my wife into the men's room and grabbed her by force, then punched her in the face. I'm not going to just leave it the way it is," he said emphatically. "You know me. I also want to listen to that recording you made. Al, I don't think this is a good idea. You're already angry, and if you hear what he said on that tape, you'll want to kill him. I really don't want to see you behind bars for the rest of your life. I'm not going to kill him, Katie, but if he's as unstable as you say, he just might come after me. I want to convince him that pursuing either of us again is a bad idea. Al, I don't really care what you think, Katie. I need a description of him, and I want this recording," he almost shouted. She sighed. She had only seen him this angry once or twice before. She knew nothing would stop him. If she doesn't give him the tape, he'll tear the house apart until he finds her. "Okay," she conceded. He's about the same height and build as you. He has straight black hair and a mustache. Are there any tattoos or scars or anything like that?" "There is nothing." "Okay, where's the recording?" "It's upstairs, I'll bring it." She walked into the bedroom and rummaged through her underwear drawer. A minute later, she was already downstairs. "Here," she said, handing Al the flash drive. "Please, I really don't want you to listen to her," she begged. "Is this the only copy?" he asked, completely ignoring her request. She nodded that it was. "Okay, I'm going to make a couple copies in case we ever need it," he said. He left her in the living room and closed the door to their home office behind him, before putting on his headphones and plugging the flash drive into his computer. He almost wished he had listened to Katie's advice and followed it. By the end of the recording, his heart was pounding, his hands were sweating, and a gallon of adrenaline was running through his body. He really wanted to kill that son of a bitch, literally. The next day at work, Michelle could tell that Al was thoughtful. She was still nervous about finding out that her boyfriend was responsible for the bombings and wondered if Al was going to fire her. When she asked if something had happened, he, not wanting to share his circumstances, told her that he had a personal problem. She had no idea what this meant, and it did nothing to ease her anxiety, so she walked in and asked directly, "Are you thinking of firing me, Al?" "What? No, of course not. What gave you this idea?" "Well, Steve was my boyfriend," she replied. "That doesn't mean I hold you responsible for his actions. Michelle, I don't know what I would do here without you." "No, your job is not in danger," he assured her. As he talked, he thought that since she was younger than him, she might know something about the internet that he didn't. "Michelle, if I just had a guy's name and mobile phone number, how would I know where he lives?" "God, Al. I have no idea, maybe whitepages.com or something?" "No, I already tried that, no luck. The only thing I can think of is to call a private investigator or a police officer, something like that," she suggested. He had never dealt with private detectives and didn't really know whether he could trust them or not. The only policeman he knew, or at least could remember, was Sergeant Jurgens, the policeman he had met during the first studio bombing attempt. He remembered that the sergeant turned out to be a rather friendly guy. He thanked Michelle for her offer and looked up the unofficial number for the 16th Division headquarters. "16th Division," boomed the voice. "Hello! Could you tell me when Sergeant Jurgens will arrive? I'd like to talk to him if possible." "Does this relate to some matter?" asked the voice. Well, actually this concerns a former case." "Wait, Sergeant Jurgens," another voice said a few seconds later. Al was surprised. He didn't know the sergeant was working that shift. He just assumed that he always worked at night. "Sergeant, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Al Hodges. Some time ago, you were investigating a bomb explosion that caught fire in my photography studio." "Yes, of course, I remember you, Al," Jurgens replied. "How can I help?" I know you're going to think I'm being rude, but I was wondering if I could ask you a favor." "I really don't know who else to call. If you're going to ask for 5 minutes alone in a cell with McElroy, it's not going to work," said the sergeant. No, that's not the point, although it's not a bad idea," Al answered after thinking. "This is a common request we receive from victims after their perpetrators are caught. I hadn't even thought about it, but now that you mentioned it..." He let his words hang with a slight chuckle. "No, this has nothing to do with the explosion. Just if I give you the guy's name and cell phone number, can you tell me his home address?" "Sorry, Al, we're not allowed to do that. What does all of this mean?" Al wasn't going to tell him the whole story, but maybe a little. "This guy harassed my wife in a restaurant. When she told him to fuck off, he slapped her. Bring her here. I'll have her fill out a complaint so we can arrest this guy." "She doesn't want to do this, Sergeant. She just wants to forget it." "Then my advice is to forget it too, Al. If you go to his house and beat the crap out of him, you'll end up in jail. You know that, right?" "Yeah, but I really don't want to beat the guy up. I just want to shame him by confronting him in front of his wife. I want to let her know that he hit Katie and tell her that if it happens again, we will press charges. If there was one thing the good sergeant couldn't stand, it was some idiot hitting a woman." "Is that all you want to do?" he asked. "That's all, Sergeant. I just want his wife to know what he did." Against his better judgment, he sighed and asked Al for information. A few minutes later, he returned to the phone. "Okay, but you didn't get it from me," he said. In addition to Belshaw's home address, Jurgens gave him the make, model, and license plate of the asshole's car. Al thanked him profusely and offered to photograph him and his family for free. "Indeed?" he asked. "Yes, sir, Sergeant. Indeed. My assistant's name is Michelle. Call her studio during business hours and she will plan everything for you." After hanging up, Al felt his pulse rise along with his blood pressure. He had the address, now he just had to restrain himself from bursting into tears. He thought about waiting a while to cool down again, but in reality, he would probably get angrier every day. He had a flash drive in his pocket. Why wait? Once again, he was consumed with thoughts of chaos as he entered the back office. "Al, will you need any special props for shooting jewelry?" Al, are you sure you're okay? You haven't been yourself all day. We have a shoot for Kennison at 2 o'clock today, remember? They will bring 4 or 5 new necklaces and bracelets. He had to think. Kennison was a regular customer, but they were always too cheap to hire models. So he had to use the same props that jewelry stores used in their windows. No, I think we have everything we need, Michelle. Just do me a favor and make sure the busts in the display cases are clean. He also had another thought. You know, why don't you dress up one of the mannequins too? It will be done, she said, heading to the props room. As soon as Al took an active part in the filming, he again became a businessman. His attention was focused on work. The work took several hours and continued until the end of the day. It was almost 7 when his happy clients left the studio. Michelle helped him clean up. She still felt guilty about her boyfriend and wanted to make sure her boss understood how dedicated she was to her job. Are you going to download all this tonight, Al? I'll stay and keep you company if you want. No, Michelle. You can leave. I have an errand to run, so I'm going to put everything off until tomorrow. He found the address without any problems. It was a rather modest house on the outskirts of the city. There were 2 cars parked in the driveway, one of which was the make and model the sergeant had given him. He made sure he still had the flash drive before going up the steps and ringing the bell. He had indeed planned to simply face his nemesis in front of his family, but Belshaw had made the mistake of answering the door in person. As soon as Al recognized the bastard, he burst inside, knocking Tony to the ground. Mrs. Belshaw came around the corner just as Al's right fist made contact with her husband's jaw. She caught him just in time. This idiot passed out before his head even hit the carpet. "Tony!" She ran towards him in a panic and lifted his head, rocking back and forth. At that moment, a young guy burst into the room. He looked about 12 years old. He looked down at his father, lying in his mother's arms, then at Al. "Ma'am, your husband raped my wife in the men's room of the restaurant." After that, he slapped her when she didn't comply with his crazy demands, and then tried to blackmail her into having sex with him and some friend of his. "If you don't believe me, then turn on this," he said, throwing the flash drive next to her. "This is a recording of your husband threatening my wife." The woman stopped rocking and looked at the small storage device as if it were a snake. This can't be," she objected. Then the baby spoke for the first time. "My father would never do that," he shouted. "The proof is right here," Al countered, pointing to the flash drive. "All you need to do is connect it to your computer and listen." "I'm calling the police," the guy announced. "Go ahead," Al replied, "but I have witnesses to the attack, as well as this recording." He was bluffing, but he did it convincingly. "My wife will choose to be charged, and this piece of scum will sit in the cell next to mine. And much longer." He looked at his wife again. "I'm serious. My wife doesn't want to go through court, but she will if she has to. When he wakes up, tell him that if he ever bothers me or my wife again, I will make sure he spends the next 20 years behind bars." With these parting words, Al turned and left. On the way home, he began to shake. He took a couple of deep breaths, but it didn't help. He pulled into the parking lot, pulled it into an empty space, and turned off the engine. He leaned back and closed his eyes, trying to regain control of his body. Now that it was over, he began to regret. He had a lot of fights growing up, but they were always in self-defense. He had never attacked anyone like this before. He regretted doing this in front of his family, especially his child. His wife should know what kind of man she married, but the child did not ask to be his son. He looked around to see where he was. It's Hugo, sitting in the parking lot of a local bar. Al drank socially, but rarely drank alone. And yet, perhaps beer was just what he needed to calm his nerves. He wasn't really in the mood for company, so he chose the most private bar stool he could see and ordered whatever light beer they had on tap. He was still thinking about Belshaw's baby and had barely taken his second sip of Miller Lite when he felt his phone ring. Checking his messages, he saw 3 text messages from Katie. He didn't even feel the first 2. He had other thoughts on his mind. He checked the last one. Are you okay? You haven't responded to my last two messages. I'm starting to worry. He replied, I'm fine. I'll be home in an hour. This gave him about 30 minutes to consider whether he had done the right thing or not. He looked so unhappy that he caught the eye of the bartender as he approached. You look like someone just shot your dog. Al looked up and grinned. No, nothing like that. I just beat up a guy right in front of his kid. I understand. And now you feel guilty. Big, Al admitted. Did this guy deserve a beating? Oh, yes. Knowing the circumstances, I don't think anyone would dispute that. I'm just not sure I should have done this in front of his son. You know, when I was little, I thought my father walked on water, until one day I came home from school and heard what sounded like muffled screams coming from my parents' bedroom. I rushed in and saw my father pressing a pillow to my mother's face and hitting her through the pillow. Do I wish my father was the guy I thought he was? Undoubtedly. Would I want to live my whole life believing he was something he wasn't? In no case. My mother suffered abuse because of me. As soon as I found out the truth, I pushed her to leave him. 2 years later, she married a man I could truly look up to. Sometimes the truth hurts, but that doesn't mean you have to remain ignorant of it. You know what they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In my case, this was true. Maybe not now, but in the long run, I think that child will someday realize that you did him a favor. Just then, someone from across the bar asked for another beer, so the wise bartender left Al alone with his thoughts. He didn't know if the bartender's story was true, but it definitely made him feel better. He took a couple more sips of his Miller, put the 20 on the counter, and headed for the door. Thank you very much, he shouted, waving goodbye. Katie was sitting in the living room watching TV when he entered. Where have you been? She begged. I called the studio at 7, but you were no longer there. Please tell me you didn't go after Tony. Why are you so worried about Tony? I thought you didn't like him anymore. I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about you. Well, you don't have to worry about me either. I can take care of myself. She sighed at her husband's lack of candor. Have you eaten yet? No. We have stuffed pork chops. I'll warm up a plate for you, she told him, and then noticed his swollen hand as he sat down to eat. I knew it, she said. Katie gently took his hand after he looked at her questioningly. Should I expect police at our door in the next few minutes? I don't know, he replied. For the next few days, they lived more like brother and sister than husband and wife. The possibility of his arrest hung over their heads like the sword of Damocles, but they didn't hear a word until Friday evening, when Kathy's cell phone rang. Al sat next to her as she looked at the display. I don't recognize this number. I'll send it to voicemail. No, you better answer. Perhaps it had something to do with that night. Turn on speakerphone. I want to know if it's your idiot lover calling from another phone. Hello? She answered cautiously. Is this Katie Hodges? Asked a female voice. Yes, she admitted cautiously. Okay, it took me a couple of days to find you. This is Tony's wife. Katie almost cried. She never thought she would have to talk to his wife. She had no idea what to say, how to apologize for sleeping with someone's spouse. But this woman was not looking for an apology. She wanted to know the truth. I want to hear your side of the story. According to my husband, you pestered him. He drank too much at dinner and gave in to your advances. Unfortunately, none of this matches the recording your husband gave me. He said Tony was forcing himself on you and attacked you. This doesn't sound like the man I married, but neither does this terrible tape. So I want to hear the whole story before I throw his worthless ass out of my house. Katie didn't hide anything. She told Mrs. Belshaw how her husband first pinned her against the wall and then dragged her into the men's room. She explained how Tony accosted her in a parking lot and then hit her in a restaurant. By the time she described the fake photo and who was in it, Tony's wife no longer doubted that she was telling the truth. That guy in the photo, does he have a flat in Southport? Yes, Tony said. His name is Brian. Your husband has a key to the apartment on a ring, Katie told her. That's good, she replied, because after I change the locks, he'll probably live there for a while. "If you want it, honey, you can have it," was the last thing she said before hanging up. Katie had tears in her eyes from embarrassment and shame. Al sat listening to the entire conversation. "Well, it doesn't seem like my visit was in vain, does it?" She also didn't mention that she called the police. "You're lucky," Katie replied. "It's funny, I don't feel lucky. Not at all." "I did not mean it. You know what I meant. If he ever tries to contact you again, let me know." Katie nodded her head in agreement. "Over the next few days, I want you to make a list of what you want from your divorce. We'll discuss this on Sunday. If it's reasonable, I'll sit down with a lawyer next week and get the paperwork done. You should probably hire your own lawyer to protect your interests. Al, I know I screwed up big time, but do you really not love me anymore?" "Katie, I loved you from the moment we met. You were perfect in every way. You were beautiful, personable, had a great sense of humor, and above all, you were brutally honest. Everyone, my parents, my friends, everyone I introduced you to in those early days, adored you. You made me the happiest person in the world when you said yes. I understand that the first time with him was not your fault. If it had ended there, I would never have held a grudge against you. But it didn't end there. You willingly returned again and again for more. You knew what you were doing, you knew it was wrong, but you continued. I'm sorry, I know you deeply regret what you did, but actions have consequences, Katie. I don't mean as a punishment. I think you'll be doing this to yourself for a long time, but I'm just not the same person I was. The person who loved you and trusted you is gone. It's not that I still don't love you. Based on all the happy years and good times we spent together, I will probably always love you to some extent. But I will also always remember what you caused. I am in pain more than any other person in my life. And I will forever keep this scar in my heart. We would never have such a happy marriage as we once did. It will be better if we part and go our separate ways. We're both still young enough to start over with someone else." Later that night, Mr. and Mrs. Hodges retired to their rooms and cried themselves to sleep. That Sunday, they sat down at the kitchen table to go over Kathy's list. They had no children, and although she did not earn as much as he did, she had a good job. As a result, she asked nothing from his business and no financial support. They agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds in half, which would give them between $30,000 and $35,000 each. He kept his SUV. She kept her Ford Hybrid. Other than that, all she wanted were some things that reminded her of the good times they had together and her personal items. The only item she considered non-negotiable was their wedding album. It was evidence of the happiest day of her life. She will cherish him until her death. Katie didn't bother hiring a lawyer. She trusted Al. The lawyer who handled all this almost felt guilty for his fee. As for the divorce, it was the smoothest, most stress-free case he had ever encountered. When it was all over, Al and Katie threw themselves into their work. During the day, this saved them from the loneliness that haunted them at night and from the emptiness of their missing spouse. While Al didn't date for almost a year, Katie jumped into the dating pool after 6 months. She felt a strong need to find a good man and atone for her sins by treating him like a king. Unfortunately, she learned firsthand about the pain she caused Al when she caught her second husband cheating. This broke her spirit when she filed for divorce. This was her second blow. A few months later, Katie was in a novelty store and accidentally discovered a hand-embroidered wall painting that read, "Those who don't learn from their mistakes are destined to repeat them." She immediately bought it and hung it on her bedroom wall as a constant reminder. 4 years have passed since the book was closed on Katie's second failed marriage. She almost gave up on finding a man to love again, but then she met Blaine. He wasn't as handsome as Al, but he was a really good man, and she felt a little spark between them from the very beginning. When their relationship became serious, she didn't want there to be secrets between them. She showed him the embroidered picture on the wall and told him the story of how she lost her first husband. When she finished, he had only one question. "Have you learned from your mistakes?" She assured him sincerely, and without question, that this was so. 8 months later, they were happily married. Al struck gold with his second wife. Ashley was everything he thought Katie was, and more. First of all, she was absolutely crazy about him, and Al knew without a doubt that she would never cheat. A year and a half after the wedding, their son Adam was born. A little less than 2 years later, the stork brought Brittany, Adam's younger sister. This was the family Al had always dreamed of, a family that was fueled by love and respect for each other. He never once doubted Ashley's love, because she reminded him of it every day. "Are you ready, Dad?" Al wiped a tear from his eye. "I think I'm as ready as any father, about to hand his little girl over to another man, darling." "I'm far from a little girl anymore, Dad," the beautiful bride grinned. "In my eyes, you will always be my little girl, darling." "Let's start," she said when the wedding march began to play. A gathering of friends and family watched as the proud dad walked his daughter down the aisle. As they approached the altar, he looked at the rest of his family in the front pew and wondered what he had ever done in life that allowed him to become so blessed. Without taking her eyes off her husband and daughter, Ashley beamed with pride. Later that year, she and Al would celebrate 25 years of outrageously happy marriage. Sitting next to his mother were Adam, his wife Coral, and their newborn son, Carrie. Yes, Al and Ashley were already grandparents. "Who gives this woman to this man?" Al smiled proudly. "I, and life goes on." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.